My cousin set up a crime to frame me, but the way we turned the tables is shocking to you. Growing up, my cousin Melanie was the golden child. You know the type, the one who walks into a room and immediately commands attention without even trying. Everyone adored her. She was charming, beautiful, and had this effortless way of making people feel like she was the center of the universe. Me? I was the quiet one, the hard worker, the one who got a polite nod when I brought home a good grade while Melanie got a standing ovation for just smiling. Family gatherings were always the same. Melanie would sit at the head of the metaphorical table, basking in the praise of our aunts, uncles, and grandparents, while I faded into the background. Even as a kid, I learned to smile through the sting of being ignored. It's just how it is, I told myself. But as we got older, I started to notice something. Melanie wasn't just soaking up the spotlight. She was actively making sure no one else had a chance to stand in it. No matter what I accomplished, Melanie found a way to undercut it. If I won a school award, she'd casually mention her plans to audition for some prestigious program. If I got a compliment at a family dinner, she'd find a way to turn the conversation back to herself. It was exhausting, but I got used to it. For years, I told myself to stay in my lane, keep my head down, work hard, and let Melanie have her shallow victories. That all changed when I landed a massive promotion at work. This wasn't just any promotion. It was the kind of job I had dreamed about for years. I worked insane hours, skipped vacations, and sacrificed sleep to get where I was. And for once, it felt like my family actually saw me. My parents, who had spent most of my life showering Melanie with attention, looked at me with genuine pride. My mom even posted about it on Facebook, calling me her hardworking son, in a way that felt so unfamiliar, it almost made me tear up. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I had broken free of Melanie's shadow. But of course, Melanie couldn't let me have that. It all went downhill during a family dinner a week later. I should have known something was up when Melanie kept looking at me with that fake, sugary smile she uses when she's up to something. Halfway through dinner, she stood up dramatically, her eyes welling up with tears. "I didn't want to do this here," she began, her voice trembling just enough to make everyone's heads snap toward her. "But I can't stay silent anymore. OP has been stealing from me." I froze. My brain short-circuited. Stealing? What in the world was she talking about? I actually laughed, thinking this was some sort of twisted joke. But no, she was dead serious. "Stealing what, Melanie?" I finally managed to say, my voice shaky from both confusion and disbelief. She sniffled and clutched her chest like a soap opera actress. "Money. Thousands of dollars." I didn't want to believe it at first, but the evidence is undeniable. The table fell silent. My parents looked at me with shock. My aunt gasped, and I sat there, stunned, trying to wrap my head around what the hell was happening. And then Melanie produced what she called proof. She pulled out her phone and showed everyone screenshots of texts, fake texts, between me and her. The texts made it look like I was confessing to sneaking into her house and siphoning money from her account. She even had photos of me near her house, which she claimed were from the day I broke in. I couldn't believe it. My cousin, the golden child, was accusing me of being a thief. Worse, she had somehow crafted this entire elaborate story with forged evidence to back her up. I looked around the table, hoping someone would call her out. But instead, all I saw were disappointed stares directed at me. My parents' faces fell, and my dad shook his head. "I don't even know who you are anymore," he muttered. That's when it hit me. Melanie wasn't just trying to ruin my reputation. She was succeeding. And my family? They believed her. After Melanie's performance at the family dinner, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The weight of her accusation hit me all at once. And the worst part was the look on everyone's faces. Disappointment. Judgment. My parents wouldn't even meet my eyes, and my aunt sat there with her mouth hanging open like she was watching a courtroom drama. I tried to defend myself. This is insane, Melanie. I didn't take anything from you. I haven't even been to your house in months. But she was ready for me. Oh, really? Then explain this, she said, pulling up photos of me standing near her driveway. I stared at the screen, trying to figure out where the hell these pictures had come from. And then I remembered I'd been in her neighborhood once to drop off something for a mutual friend. I wasn't even near her house for more than 5 minutes, but she'd used it as ammunition. I was in your neighborhood once, I admitted, but it wasn't for you. This is ridiculous, Melanie. You know I didn't do anything. But she wasn't backing down. I wish that were true, she said, shaking her head with a fake look of pity. But my bank records show someone accessed my account using my Wi-Fi. You were there, OP. The texts prove it. I could barely speak. She'd gone so far as to forge texts where I supposedly confessed to needing the money to cover bills. And the scary part? It looked convincing. My parents, who I thought would have my back, looked at the screen, then at me, and I could see the doubt creeping into their faces. You've always been so responsible, my mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this to your cousin? I didn't, I said, my voice cracking. Mom, you know me. I wouldn't do this. Melanie is lying. But Melanie was playing her role perfectly. She wiped away a tear and looked down at her lap like she was too heartbroken to speak. And, just like that, the family was on her side. By the end of the night, I'd gone from being the hard-working son they were proud of to a pariah. My parents didn't say much to me on the way home, but I could feel the tension radiating off them. I spent hours that night scrolling through my phone, trying to figure out how Melanie had done it. The photos, the texts, the whole ridiculous story. It was all fake, but she'd made it seem airtight. The fallout was immediate. My parents stopped speaking to me unless it was to ask if I was planning to apologize to Melanie. Friends who'd heard the rumors started ghosting me. And to top it all off, my boss called me into their office a few days later. We've heard some concerning things, OP, she said, looking uncomfortable. I'm not saying we believe them, but given the nature of your position, we need to investigate. That was the moment I realized Melanie wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was trying to destroy my life. By the end of the week, I felt like I was barely hanging on. My family believed her. My friends were gone. My job was at risk. And Melanie? She was acting like the victim, soaking up sympathy from everyone. I was alone, defeated, and wondering how the hell I was going to get out of this. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got a call from a lawyer. Just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. What did I have to lose? Is this OP? A formal voice asked. Yes, who's this? I replied, already bracing myself for bad news. This is Daniel Gray from the law offices of Henderson and Gray. I'm calling regarding your late grandmother's estate. Could you come in for a reading of her will? I froze. My grandmother had passed away a few months earlier, but I hadn't expected anything to come of it. She was always kind to me, but we weren't especially close, and I knew my family didn't think much of her modest savings or assets. I wasn't aware I was included in her will, I stammered. There's a provision that pertains specifically to you, he said, It's important that you attend. Tomorrow at noon works for us. Can you make it? Still reeling from everything Melanie had done, I agreed. I didn't think much of it. Maybe Grandma had left me a keepsake or a few kind words. Honestly, I wasn't expecting anything big. When I showed up at the law office the next day, I was shocked to find my parents, Melanie, and my aunt already there. Melanie smirked when she saw me, clearly assuming this was another opportunity for her to flaunt her golden child status. The will reading started as expected. My grandmother had left small amounts to a few charities, some sentimental items to various family members, and then came the part that caught everyone off guard, the bulk of her estate. To my grandson, O.P., who I've watched endure far more than his fair share in life, the lawyer read aloud, I leave the entirety of my lake house, my investment portfolio, and my savings account, which are to be used to build the life he deserves. The room went silent. My mother's mouth fell open. My aunt gasped, and Melanie's face turned a shade of red I didn't know was possible. Wait, what? Melanie blurted out, breaking the silence. That doesn't make any sense. Grandma barely even talked to O.P. She wouldn't leave all that to him. The lawyer looked at her, unbothered. I assure you, this is legitimate. Your grandmother was very clear about her intentions. I sat there in stunned silence, barely processing what I just heard. But it wasn't over yet. There's one more thing, the lawyer continued, pulling out a sealed envelope. She left this letter, specifically for O.P. You can read it here, or take it home if you prefer. I took the envelope, my hand shaking. I opened it right there, with everyone staring at me, and began reading. The letter started kindly, with my grandmother apologizing for how the family had treated me over the years. She explained that she had always noticed the favoritism, even if she hadn't spoken up about it. But then, the letter took a turn. I also know what Melanie has been doing to you, she wrote. I've seen her lies, her manipulation, and how she has always tried to tear you down. I couldn't intervene while I was alive, but I kept a record of everything. In my journals, you'll find proof of her schemes. Use it as you see fit, and know that I always believed in you. My heart was pounding as I finished reading. Proof. She had left me proof. I left the law office with the letter in one hand and my head spinning. My grandmother had not only left me her entire estate, but also the one thing I desperately needed. Proof. Melanie's smug confidence was replaced with a barely concealed rage. What did she mean by proof? What's in the letter? She snapped as soon as we stepped outside. None of your business, Melanie, I replied, finally feeling like I had the upper hand. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel helpless. She glared at me, but I ignored her and left without another word. When I got home, I dug through the box the lawyer had handed me, labeled Grandma's Personal Effects. Inside, I found several old journals, meticulously written in her neat handwriting. Each one was dated and sectioned off by year. As I flipped through the pages, I started to realize just how much my grandmother had seen over the years. She'd written down everything. There were entries about how my parents favored Melanie over me, times when I had been blamed for things I didn't do, or when Melanie was handed opportunities I had worked hard for. But it wasn't just a diary of unfair treatment. The most recent entries were far more detailed and damning. One entry, written just a year ago, stood out immediately. Melanie bragged to her friends during dinner tonight about how she's going to ruin OP's reputation if he gets too full of himself. She even laughed about how easy it is to make people believe her lies. She mentioned something about editing screenshots on her computer too, Teach him a lesson. It made me sick to my stomach. Another entry, dated a few months later, read, I overheard Melanie talking about a new plan to discredit OP. She said she'd take photos of him near her house and twist it into a story about theft. I don't think she realized I could hear her, but it's disgusting how far she's willing to go. I wish there was more I could do for OP while I'm alive. Each entry was a dagger, cutting through Melanie's lies. My grandmother had meticulously documented conversations, overheard schemes, and even moments when Melanie had openly gloated about manipulating our family. The most recent entries detailed how she'd crafted the fake texts and staged the photos of me near her house. My hands were shaking as I read. This was exactly what I needed to clear my name. But my grandmother wasn't done. She'd also left a USB drive tucked into one of the journals. When I plugged it into my laptop, I found audio recordings. My grandmother, ever the meticulous planner, had secretly recorded some of her conversations with Melanie. In one recording, Melanie's voice was unmistakable. It's not like anyone will believe him. I've got all the screenshots, the photos, everything. OP's so gullible, he'll never figure it out. By the time I'm done, he'll be lucky if anyone even talks to him anymore. Hearing her voice sent chills down my spine. This was it. This was the ammunition I needed to destroy her web of lies. I sat back in my chair, feeling a strange mix of vindication and anger. My grandmother had done more for me in her passing than my family ever had while she was alive. Now, I had to decide what to do next. Melanie wasn't going to see this coming. The next day, I carefully laid out all the evidence my grandmother had left me, the journals, the USB drive, and the letter. It felt surreal holding onto something so powerful, knowing it could shatter Melanie's carefully constructed lies. I knew I had to be methodical. If I rushed into this, it might backfire. The first step was obvious. My parents. When my mom arrived at my place, she was guarded, almost distant. She sat stiffly, her arms crossed, the tension between us palpable. It was clear she still believed I was in the wrong and expected me to beg for forgiveness. I didn't waste time trying to convince her with words. Instead, I opened one of my grandmother's journals and handed it to her. It was one of the entries where Grandma detailed Melanie's schemes, how she had openly bragged about crafting fake screenshots and staging photos to make me look guilty. My mom's face shifted as she skimmed the pages, her confidence cracking as disbelief set in. She looked up, hesitant, and murmured something about how this couldn't possibly be real. I stayed calm, opening my laptop and pulling up the audio recordings. As soon as Melanie's voice played, gloating about how easy it was to manipulate people and how she'd planned to destroy me, the color drained from my mom's face. The weight of what she was hearing hit her hard. She sat back, staring at the journal in her hands, as the realization washed over her. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw doubt in her eyes, not toward me, but toward Melanie. She muttered something about not knowing, about how she thought Melanie wouldn't lie like that. Her voice cracked, and tears welled up as the full picture came into view. I didn't hold back. I reminded her of the damage this had caused, how I'd been alienated, humiliated, and left to fend for myself while everyone blindly believed Melanie. My mom didn't argue. She just sat there, flipping through the pages of the journal again and again, like she needed to reread the words to make sense of them. Eventually, she promised to take everything to my dad. She looked shaken and remorseful, but I couldn't let myself feel satisfied just yet. There was more to do. Later that night, I reached out to Melanie. I sent her a carefully worded message, one that sounded neutral, like I wanted to resolve things and move forward. Her reply came quickly, full of smugness, as if she thought I was finally bowing to her. She suggested we meet at her place the next day. Melanie thought she had already won. She believed I was coming to grovel, to admit defeat. What she didn't know was that her lies were crumbling behind the scenes. Tomorrow, everything she built was going to collapse, and she had no idea it was coming